Welcome. Welcome to our second segment of Life Lessons. And we continue with messages based on the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. The last segment was on the first section of the 5 books of Moses, Parshat Bereshit in Genesis. And now we continue with Noach. But I want to start first with an interesting story that has some kind of a message to us. There was this couple that the wife was a health freak, very much into health food, and made her husband crazy that he needs to diet, and every day with a brand cereal and with the substitute sugars. But thankfully, they lived quite a long life, well into the 90s. And then time had come, and they were up there in heaven. For reward for this wonderful life that they had here in this world, the heaven have decreed that they would have a very beautiful place in the Garden of Eden. They appointed a tour guide for them to give them their reward. Brought them to their beautiful home, showed them the gardens, the tennis court, and everything that they could have. Lunchtime had arrived, and the tour guide says, well, we're going to go to the club for lunch. They come in for lunch, and they see unbelievable foods all on the table. And husband turns to the tour guide angel and asks him, and how much is this? He says, you're in heaven. This is the reward. It's all for free. Turns to the angel and he says, all these foods? And what's with the diet? So the angel says, remember, you're in heaven. No diets. Where's the substitute sugar? We don't need substitute sugar here. Where's the brand cereal? Don't need brand cereal here. You could eat everything, no problem whatsoever. The husband turns to his wife and he says, my dear wife, if you wouldn't have made me crazy with the cereal and all that stuff, we could have been here 10 years ago. What's important to remember is that the purpose, as we mentioned in the last segment, is this world. Everything is wonderful in the reward, and God willing, we're all going to have a good reward, but the purpose is this world. And as we come to this segment, we come into the struggle and the challenges of keeping this world a world the way God wants it to be. And this is what Noach was facing. Noach was a perfect individual, brought up a family, and just like this, God comes to him and says, you know what? I'm not so happy with what I have created, and therefore, I'm going to bring a flood into the world. But you are going to build an ark to save yourself and the family, and anyone else that will repent and wants to regret on everything they have done. We are told that it took Noah 120 years, biblical times, to build this ark. He did it all by himself. But the purpose of all that was that while he's building this ark, people are asking, what exactly are you doing? They see this Noach standing there. He wasn't known as a carpenter. And here he's standing, building this huge ark. And he's telling everyone, God is going to bring a flood. And humanity, if they don't repent, it will be over. And whoever is behaving is going to be saved right here in this boat. And this is what he kept on doing. And this is a very important point about Noach's activities. What we don't find about what Noach was doing is he limited his activities just if he was asked. If people came and asked, what are you doing? Then he was telling them. But we don't find about Noach that he went out of his way to preach to others and say, watch out, be careful. It's like almost, as we would say in our days, he hung up bulletin boards, wherever you're allowed to do that, and where it's mentioned, this and this is going to happen. Well, that's it. He didn't go out of his way to convince and to influence. And here we come to this idea about the power that we have as human beings in influencing others. That it's by itself had a development. There was a development when it took effect and different steps into it. In other words, not always it worked. As we see by Noach, and we're not blaming Noach, we're just telling you the history of it, as we're soon going to explain, the limitation that he had and what he was able to do with those limitations. And let me just explain, because we have examples from a few people in our history, at least in the beginning of history. But before that, I want to explain something very important. We are put here in this world for a purpose. As mentioned, if God created this world, that means there's a purpose in this world. He wouldn't create something for no reason. If he created us, so that means there is a purpose for us being here in this world. And we cannot come and say, I am one person of so many billions, so what difference do I make? What difference does it make in my attitude or in my commitment? So we see it's not so. We see it is very important, every individual's approach and what everyone does. Because we all have an effect and an influence on somebody else. The fact itself that God put us here in this world, he put us for a reason that each one of us have a responsibility to be an example for somebody else. So that puts there's 2 points here. It's a privilege to be here in the God's world, but with that privilege comes also the responsibility. However, a lot of times this is the question that we have to ourselves, and we say, if I like somebody, so that means I like them the way they are. But here comes the interesting question. If I really like the individual, I want that individual should even be better than what they could be? And this is the dilemma that a lot of times we face. You know, we like the individual, may it be spouses, may it be parents and children, may it be good friends. And then we think to ourselves, but because I like them so much, I really would like them to know what the truth is all about. And this is sometimes where we have to be very careful, because we want them to know what the truth is all about, but we have to be very careful how we do it. This is what's called the idea of influencing others in a positive way. And this has been something that we have struggled from day one, because we have our own challenges, and then we have also the challenge how to influence others in doing the right thing. So in the beginning of our history, we find like this. there is these 10 generations from Adam to Noach. One of them was an individual by the name in Hebrew Chanoch. In English we call him Enoch. It's written that in those times, each individual, if you'll see in the beginning, in the first section of Genesis, they lived for a long time. There's one person, when we come to Enoch, we find about him that he lived quietly a short time. We should all live that long, but it says that Enoch lived for 365 years. As I said, we should all live that long. But in comparison to everyone else, they all lived 900, 960, 910. So this was really almost less than half that what everyone lived then. But this is what the verse says. The verse says, Enoch followed God, but then he wasn't there anymore because God took him. Vayithalech Chanoch et ha'elokim, ve'inenu, he wasn't there anymore because God took him. What does it mean? So we are told, the way our sages says, because God was afraid that he is going to be influenced by others, and he was a righteous person, so he took him away before his time. As long as he was righteous, let him pass away when he is righteous. So the Talmud tells us something very interesting about the life of Enoch. Most of his life, he lived in a cave. Why did he live in a cave? He was afraid the whole time not to be influenced by the corrupting generation that started to develop at that time. So here we have a very interesting situation. He knows what the right thing to do, as a lot of us would know, we would hope, but he's afraid he won't have the strength to stand strong. So what does he do? He avoids contact with those that may have the wrong influence. To use an example that maybe we could relate to it, let's say if an individual that is keeping kosher and he's becoming used to keeping kosher, but then there is that restaurant that he loves very much before he kept kosher. And he's afraid that if he would pass that street where that restaurant is, he won't be able to resist the temptation. So the way to deal with it a lot of times in the beginning is to avoid that place. How do you avoid? Avoid that street. Don't go that street, go somewhere else. But just this is for the beginning. Eventually, we hope the individual will get stronger, that he could face that restaurant and feel very strong, and even if he stepped in there for a while, and nothing will happen. But in the beginning, we could see as the person is getting used to overcoming their challenges, it may be hard, so you have to avoid the situation. Same thing is, it could be sometimes an individual that you feel that whenever you talk to that individual, it always ends up in learning something negative. We should know about these things, but sometimes it could happen, such a thing. So then, don't go into debates, don't go into discussions, just avoid. When you feel stronger, then you could go into discussion. So here too, what happened to Mr. Chanoch, Mr. Enoch, he just avoided. But what's interesting is the way our sages explain, we have to understand the development of influence. At that time, people didn't know what does it mean to influence others. As God created the world, everything took time. as we know about the idea of baby steps, the same thing here. Everything has steps to it. So step number one is the individual needs to be strong. When the individual is strong, then you're ready to influence others. But now when it comes to influence others, let's say you're ready to come out of the cave, in that itself, you're still very hesitating. So this is what happens now to Noach. Noach is hesitating, but he's giving God's message, but the recipient are not yet ready to receive. It took a long time. It took till the revelation of God on Mount Sinai that things should start penetrating. And even then we know how much resistance there was. But after Noach, we find comes Abraham, 10 generations later. We find something very interesting about Abraham. And we're going to read about him. So he went to have a discussion with God. God informs him, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. So what does Abraham do? He goes to plead, but it stops. He says, is there 50 righteous people? Would you save everyone because there's 50? God says, no, there's no 50. Maybe there's 40. Maybe there's 30. Maybe there's 20. Maybe there's 10. When God told him, no, there's no 10 righteous people there, he went back. He didn't continue to plead. He didn't continue to even plead and say, and what happens if nobody is there righteous? Would you please give them another chance? He didn't do that. And the reason is because that itself was already way, way beyond what Enoch has done and what Noach has done. Noach has only had put bulletin boards. He only gave information. He says God is going to destroy the world while he's building if people are asking him what to do. He basically opened up an information center, and that's it. Abraham took it a step further. He's influencing, and we know Abraham and Sarah both did quite a lot in influencing, but that also is limited. Moshe, that's who we find went a step further. When he, during the sin of the golden calf, and he turns to God, and God tells him, you know what, I am upset with these people, and I'm going to destroy them. And Moses says, if you will, then destroy me too. Wipe my name out of your book. This was a new one. This was already going beyond what Abraham did. Abraham was pleading, maybe there's a righteous person. Here God says to Moses, I'll destroy everyone and I will start the Jewish nation with you. From you it will start. Moses says, no. If that's what you're going to do, wipe my name out. And as we know, the reason why God was asking is to hear the answer. And when Moses said that, this pleased God very much, because this is what he wanted to hear. But that only brings out the point is about the level of influence, how this had continued. So we see all these steps. And after the revelation of God in Mount Sinai, he gave us the ability, and at the same time as all human beings in this world, that not only you could say something that I disagree with what the other one is doing something negative, but to be able to influence in a positive way. And we know till today how much we struggle with the idea of positive influence and how hard that is. But this had begun with our Parshat with Noach, because somebody needed to be saved in this whole situation to be able to continue and to bring something positive into new world order that God was creating after the destruction through the flood. And this is, Noach was chosen because he lived that kind of life. He lived a life of being righteous and devoted to God. So this is what was very important. So Noach represents this idea. Now I want to mention something interesting about Noach, because we mentioned the connection to Abraham. that in Hebrew, as you could see, Noach, and the numerical equivalent of Noach is 58. Nun is a 50, Chet is an 8. So what is 58? This is something very interesting. This is how old Abraham was when Noach passed on. We know there were 10 generations between Noach to Abraham. But and we know Abraham was born at the end of the life of Noach, where another interesting point, an easy way to remember, in Hebrew, in the years that we count when Abraham was born, 1948. 1948 in Hebrew, this is when Noach was born. This is when Abraham was born. But when Abraham was 58, that this is the numerical equivalent of Noach, this is when Noach passed on. This is very interesting. This is like almost handing down of the torch to Abraham, but Abraham is going to take it even further. But what Noach has done is quite impressive and also very important. So let's talk a little bit about the situation of the ark, what happened in the ark, because there's a lesson to take out of that too. So God comes to Noach and he tells him to build the ark. But interesting, there's specific instructions how this should be done. So he tells him this huge ark that you're going to be building, it should have 3 floors. One floor, the bottom floor, for the garbage. You have to remember they were almost there for a year. Was there a compost on the lower ground in the ark? That's something we could have a discussion about this. But no question, there was a designated place where recycling and garbage should be done, on the lower floor. And I'm sure having garbage there for a year, they were very creative how to figure out to live with it. The second floor had the animals, because as we know, there was from every kind that was saved. So you had all kinds there. You had the lions with the sheep. Where this is very interesting because we learn that one of the things that happened in the ark was an example of what's going to happen in Messianic times. The verse says in Isaiah that in the wonderful times that are going to come, we hope very soon, that the lion with the sheep, they will live together, they won't be afraid from each other. The girl say Zavin Kevis, the wolf will live together with the sheep. This exactly happened in the ark of Noach. So it actually happened. So when we say we're praying for something to happen, we know it already happened. So we have already an example from it. The top floor was the human beings. The top floor was the human beings. So here we have a very important example to take out from this. When we leave our lives, we have to remember we need to separate. When it comes to the garbage, that should be thrown into a separate floor completely. Not to live with the filth and the spiritual filth together with us. We need to separate. When we face a situation, we have to right away divide it into 3. What belongs to garbage? What belongs on the animalistic level? And what belongs to the human level? And then we could figure it out, and that will help us to live a better life. Because when we know that this belongs to garbage, forget it. This has to be thrown out. Animalistic, something that we have to deal with. It's a challenge. Humanity, that's a high level. That's a high level. This is the ultimate goal. And when we